Hello and welcome to the latest edition of the Cloud Native Now podcast. I'm your host, Mike Vizard, and once again, we're with Paul Nashawaty, practice lead for Futurum Group for application development. And we're going to be talking about, well, today we're going to start with the latest version of Kubernetes that's out there, 1.31. Paul, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here, Mike.
Yeah. What is your sense of this release? Because I think there's a cadence starting to emerge where the third release is usually like a maintenance update with some additional capabilities added and maybe not stuff that is so earth-shaking. And I'm trying to figure out where this release fits in that overall 3 updates a year cadence.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. When we look at, this release, I think that it's important to understand, it's Kubernetes 1.31. It really does add in a number of enhancements, right? So we see that there's 45 different enhancements that have been brought into this release. 11 of them have graduated to stable, to your point, right? Like what's required and what's not required. 22 are entering beta, and 12 of those enhancements are in alpha project stage. So, when you look at those 45 enhancements that have been made for Kubernetes, it's really working with a technical oversight committee for Kubernetes. They basically understand what it is that's a priority, why it's prioritized, and then how you move those different functionalities up the stack for release. I do believe that the release of these additional enhancements are driving towards the continuous adoption, such as open container initiatives that help with imaging and artifacts, and then also other areas around API integration as well. So there's definitely some areas here that tie to the release of the functionality, as well as what I'm seeing in research that says this is what the audience is looking for.
All right. Time out for a second. Audio is great. Stop moving. All right.
Oh, sorry. Right. I'm Italian. I can't.
There you go. All right. Do the best you can. All right. Well, let's pick that up from here, because one of the things that has always perplexed me a little bit is the people who are behind Kubernetes are hardcore DevOps proponents, and they want everybody to stay current and can make sure they're doing their upgrades and minimizing technical debt. The reality is quite different. Most of the enterprises I talk to have versions of clusters that go back as far as 12, maybe even earlier, and they're kind of hesitant to upgrade them because they're worried that some API will go away, and then as a result, whatever application they have will break. And it almost feels like they're just relatively content to stay where they are. And if they have a new project, they'll go to the latest version of Kubernetes, but they wind up with all these different flavors. And sometimes they have multiple distributions from different providers. What is the current state of Kubernetes management in your mind?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I mean, I definitely think that the backwards compatibility across the bridging the gap between the old and new, it has to be there. There has to be a frictionless way to move forward. But we also, one of the things that you didn't touch on that I think is important to understand is the reason why a lot of times these releases happen as frequent as they do is to protect the application and the tech stack that's going along with it. There's sometimes security holes are found. Sometimes functionality is the APIs, like you were saying, are not working. Because those APIs are not working, the patches may enhance that or fix that. But regression testing is important, obviously, when you're looking at the release of these development, but seamless integration across the different tech stacks, especially as the different locations, different applications, different silos of applications within data centers, all have various versions of applications as they're running. On a previous episode, we talked about, the integration between system of records and systems of engagement, and new systems of engagement might be using the latest and greatest, tech stack in order to kind of put out their solutions, but they might be connecting to previous versions, because those previous versions are just encapsulated and basically left to be used as a system of record.
All right. Well, are we getting to the point now where mere mortals can manage these Kubernetes clusters, or do we still need that kind of DevOps / software engineering expertise to manage Kubernetes? And I think there's a lot hinging on this because the pace of adoption of these Kubernetes clusters is really, in my mind, not so much tied to the available budget as it is just the number of people with the skills required to manage these things.
Yeah, well, I think what we're seeing in this landscape is definitely a driving factor for consolidation in the vendor space, and the vendor space is really what's helping those organizations and those individuals manage these clusters. For example, D2iQ was acquired by Nutanix, right? As an example, D2iQ focused on the management of Kubernetes clusters. There's a number of other technologies out there, like Rayfag, for example, that manages more than just Kubernetes clusters. They manage the VMs now. But the business models that came out initially was to solve exactly to your point. How do you let organizations, DevOps teams, platform engineering teams easily manage their environments? And by using a specific tech stack, they allow you to do it. But what I'm seeing, Mike, is organizations larger organizations are seeing the value of these emerging technology stacks to provide that ease of use for Kubernetes clusters holistically. So I think what we're seeing is that consolidation in the market of the market landscape to bring in that tech stack into the larger opportunities that are out there.
All right. Well, that kind of brings us to our next two subjects. And what we have seen is the arrival of Carpenter 1.0. I think, if I recall correctly, this project was kind of started by AWS back in the day. And it's supposed to make it simpler to manage the underlying compute infrastructure that Kubernetes is consuming. I feel like it's taken a long time to get to version 1.0, and I think maybe this thing has been around for a year or two or more. What is your sense of where does this fit in the cloud-native landscape?
Yeah, Carpenter was announced a while ago as an opportunity for to basically respond to adjustments in the underlying tech stack, working towards application loads and such. I think that there has been some readjustments and some shifting because when Carpenter first came out, it was really about driving towards a harmonized like really a very focused delivery of tech that's within a specific distribution. What the rebirth of it, I guess, the reason why it took so long for it to kind of come out, in my opinion, is there's an understanding of harmonization across multiple architectures. And there needed to be, Carpenter needed to have that ability to offer that lower cluster compute cost across those different underutilized nodes. And those underutilized nodes need to be driven across different architectures. And that's where I think that there was some disruption in the delivery cycle of it. But I think it's all in all, it promises to be a way where developers can, use the Amazon, EKS in order to, use Carpenter to kind of use those clusters and deliver adoption across EKS users, but also it has the ability to scale out across the multiple architectures as well.
Mm-hmm. So are we starting to see the centralization of Kubernetes clusters then? Is that kind of, and I don't mean reducing the number as much as I just mean kind of folks getting a control plane that kind of spans them all and lets them manage them regardless of version or distribution?
Yeah, I think that's the logical approach. Standardization, it reduces the number of tools. If you look at how Carpenter Drift is working, it allows for that utilization of a desired state of using Amazon Machine Instance and basically moving away from a very specific delivery and using it across the entire ecosystem. I think that's really where developers will help balance that availability across the not just the utilization of resources, but also security requirements. And I think that also has the ability to, provide consolidated functionality that you wouldn't necessarily get by using these individual deployments.
All right. And now shifting a gear slightly to Rafe. They just came out with the ability to essentially apply financial controls, aka FinOps, to your Kubernetes management framework. Is there a difference in your mind in terms of what Rafe is providing that we wouldn't see in a lot of the open source tools? And B, has finance tools essentially become an extension of the management framework, or do we still need these kind of standalone FinOps tools?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great one. That kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier on the different platform management of Kubernetes clusters. Haseeb and Sean at Rafe, I met with them not too long ago, probably maybe a week or two ago, and we talked about the FinOps kind of play and what they're doing. But it's not just about the FinOps play; it's about that up leveling Rafe to be more focused on adding additional value. So cost management is key, but managing your entire ecosystem is also equally as important, right? Because again, one of the things that Rafe, when it first came out, was about simplifying the Kubernetes cluster management, and that was but over the past year or so, there's been a pivot to move away from just the Kubernetes cluster management, which is important, by the way, but to really focus on what it means to do cost and also understand that looking at historical consumptions workloads and then also provide those chargeback models. So I think that the additional value add here is really providing that functionality where automating cluster provisioning or automating infrastructure and basically providing self-service experience for developers are key areas for the developer productivity and for what Rafe can provide for their latest offering.
It also seems like they're at. Let me try that again. Right. It also seems like they're at. Nope. Hold on. It also seems like they're at the forefront of the democratization of Kubernetes because their framework is accessible to your average IT administrator. And I wonder, there's a lot of work being done on these various other open source projects. And I know that Rafe is a commercial entity, but at the end of the day, is cost really the big factor here for the management plane, or is that something people are willing to pay for?
I think cost is part of the maturity of the Kubernetes adoption. Once you actually have your clusters running and implemented, understanding the cost factors really does come into consideration. I don't think it's the primary source of information. Like, I don't think that if you are starting to modernize or refactor your applications, unfortunately, the first thing that organizations, they don't think about is cost. They think about what does it take to do this, and they want some type of cost factor that allows us to say this is what it means. But a lot of times, the organizations that are doing the refactoring are looking at the resources needed and often over provision those resources because they want to make sure that they need to get done what they need to get done. But cost does come into a consideration once you start going into production. And, once you start running in production, if you're running at, 50% of the provisioned resources, then you can easily give up some of those resources for other projects. That's where, understanding what your Kubernetes clusters are doing really matters. But again, it's a part, I would call that more of a phase 2 part of the maturity. And most organizations are looking at it that way because phase 1 is understanding the skill set to do the actual refactoring.
I call that the adult supervision phase because so many of the developers are, to your point, they over-provision Kubernetes clusters because that's what they were used to doing in virtual machine environments. And they're like, give me the biggest, baddest amount of machine you can get and, devil with the cost. It's not my concern. I just want to make sure my app is available. So if the resources are available or rated 1 to 10, they're always on a 10. So I think that requires IT people to come in behind them and make those adjustments. And as long as the app doesn't crash, the developer probably will never know.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing is if you put those cost controls in place and the application developer or the DevOps team, has what they need, as long as they have what they need, there shouldn't be an issue, right? And that's where I think RayFay can come in and basically do an understanding of the environment and then right size or right provision the resources for those teams. That's really where I think this comes in. But again, in my mind, unfortunately, this is not top of mind when it comes to that modernization effort. It's really a kind of an afterthought. And to me, it really does need to be moved into the primary part of the refactoring. It needs to be moved into that understanding, what is it going to cost to do this? What are the actual costs to deliver?
Right. I mean, otherwise you're buying a house without really understanding what it means to live in it, right? So there you go.
Correct. Yeah.
I want to shift the gear to service meshes. Now, I don't think we've actually talked about this topic before, but there's a new update to Linkerd, and they added support for IP6 and a couple other nifty niceties in the networking space. What is your sense of where are we with this stuff right now? Because a lot of times I talk to folks and they need a lot of APIs before they wake up and say, I need a service mesh as an API gateway, or sometimes they'll just use the proxy software, and then they have a choice between Linkerd and Istio, and it seems like Linkerd does 80% or more of what I need, and Istio probably can do a few more things, but maybe only large enterprises care about those things. But there is a lightweight version of Istio. So where are we in this battle? And there are other service meshes out there for that matter as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a conversation that, I have a number of data points and research around service meshes. I've done a lot of conversations with, the likes of the commercial versions of Istio and the commercial versions of Linkerd, whether it be something like Solo or Kong or any of these other companies. There's a number of areas that I think is interesting when it comes to service meshes. A while back, maybe about less than a year ago, or maybe so. The analyst community, when somebody from another analyst firm put out a report saying, our service mesh is actually worthwhile or worth the effort or worth the problem. And my opinion is, I believe service meshes are indeed an enabler for success. And then that's allowing for not just that east-west and north-south traffic, whether you're using API gateways or service meshes for application communication, but it's also about streamlining the number of API calls. API calls get expensive. All right. And they get super expensive. So if you can streamline them with a service mesh in order to reduce the number of calls using, maybe Linkerd's approach or, an Istio approach, using the Envoy as a proxy or not, there's different ways to reduce those API calls. And if you can standardize that helps. Now, what I like about Linkerd is it has some heritage in the, I call it the legacy applications or the older applications, and has the ability to not just work with cloud native, but also work with those applications that you might maybe migrating away from. And that's something that has been incredibly important, because it's, again, bridging the gap between your heritage applications and your new way of delivery. You need to have that way of communication between those applications while you're doing that work. If you don't, then you have these silos of tech stacks, and then that increases your tech debt. And if there's a desire for many organizations to reduce your tech debt, and start pulling back from the different, multiple technologies to do the job. So I think that there's a lot of power behind this Linkerd announcement. I think that there's a lot of interest around, again, the way I view it is that bridging the gap between the old and new. But I think that there's also some of the new technologies that there are enhancements that they put in Linkerd that allows for the cloud native deployments to be more efficient as well. So like what they're doing. like that. It comes with, support for JSON output, so you can automate. You can bring that piece in. That's a cool feature that kind of drives toward that automation piece. But there's definitely reasons to kind of go with each approach. I am for service mesh. As an analyst, I definitely know that the research I've seen, organizations are pulling to use service mesh. So I think that it's worth the investment. It's worth the time to think about it.
All right. And then lastly, there's an article on Cloud Native Now talking about how to apply policy as code to GKE. And I'm sure that's helpful to a lot of folks. But what is the state of policy as code right now? We've been talking about this for a long time, but it's not clear to me that everybody gets it. And some folks think it's just hard.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those things that's interesting. Policy as code is, the way I view it in the CI/CD pipeline is you have to have a skilled or, basically a higher higher value resource deliver the workflows in order to implement your policy within your CI/CD pipeline. Okay. But in order to streamline like everything that we're trying to do and deliver code faster and push applications out the door quickly, in order to do that, implementing quote as code or policy as code requires some type of versioning control, but it also enables automated enhancements and integration within that CI/CD pipeline. So you can ensure that those policies are applied across the environment. And as you've heard me say, 1,000 times, that the accountability is on the organization pushing out the applications. They need to be accountable for what they're delivering. And by putting in policy as code, it does reduce the human error part of it, but it also increases the ability to do automation. So again, I look at policy as code as part of that maturity cycle within organizations. And if they can have a strong maturity across the CI/CD pipeline, that allows them to do more rapid delivery of the applications they're trying to push out the door.
All right, folks, as always, we've been up and down that cloud native stack again, and it remains complex, remains challenging, and the issues go well beyond Kubernetes clusters itself. But hey, they are becoming slowly but surely more accessible. Hey, Paul, thanks for being on the show as always.
Thank you, Mike. It's great to be here.
All right. And thank you all for listening to the latest edition of the Cloud Native Now podcast. You can find this on all your favorite outlets. And of course, you can find it on the homepage for Cloud Native Now. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you next time.